Meeting is being recorded.
Okay, I would like to start the session by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, sea, and waters of the area we live and work across Australia. We acknowledge their continuing connection to their culture, and we pay our respect to their elders, past and present. Please note, this session is being recorded now. If you don't want to be recorded, please turn off your camera and microphone. And we have session notes from this Bitly link. It's available in chat, Zoom chat, or Hover chat. So please add your attendances in the notes. If you have any questions or comments, please use chat or just speak out. We have only a few members in this call. Let me skip that. So here is the agenda for today. I will give introduction to the group, then introduction to the data versioning principles, and then we will review the data versioning use case and describe use case with a verbal model. We have 40 minutes allocated for discussion. We will see how it goes and discuss way forward. So here I'm going to introduce the interest group. Here is a brief history. So that actually we started to discuss the data versioning concept from plenary 8, that's in 2016. Then we thought we form a interest group when we identify the actual deliverables, then we form a working group. So that was formed in March 2018. After 2 years, forward to March 2020, we delivered the group's final report. That's the data versioning principles. Then, data according to RDA rules, working group has his time span. So either, correct me, Stephanie, either 2 years or about 4 plenary sessions. After we deliver our reports, we transitioned to data versioning interest group to keep the work left from the working group. And then in last 2 plenary, we discussed the possibility, how to coming out of actionable recommendations by following the principles. So that's a history of the group. So why we did start the group from the first place? That started in 2016. When several Australia groups, we trying to implement the dynamic data citation working group recommendation. Then we realized that we needed to collect and analyze use cases to understand what does a versioning means, what counted as a version and associated concept and etc. So a group of Australia research data commons then started to collect and compile use cases. And then we took these to RDA, form an interest group and a working group. That end up we collected 39 use cases. Looking from user cases, we quickly realized that there was no formal agreed ways to version data. But independently from each individual use case, we find the similarities and the inconsistencies. So that's why we formed the working group to do the analyze and report on these use cases. Then, so after we deliver the working group final report, we transitioned to interest group. Here is the charter, the specific goals for the data versioning interest group. So first, we keep to promote the data versioning principles. That's a supporting output from the data versioning working group, and develop recommendations for adoption of the data versioning principles. And also there are more issues people discuss since we publish the data principles. So we would like to have this interest group to provide a forum for discussing issues related to data versioning, data republication, mirroring, and reuse. And with that three objectives in mind, so particularly the objectives for this plenary, we would like to get feedback about the working group's output, that's data versioning principles, and get more user cases or updating existing user cases. And the user cases were collected about 2 or 3 years ago. Since then, people may have changed their practice. If there are any change, we would like to have update of the recent practice. And then we also call for participation, for co-chairs probably couldn't understand or all requirements from the field. So we would like people to participate and to join the force to develop the actionable recommendations on data versioning management. Okay, that's introduction of the interest group and the goals for this plenary. And is there any questions before I introduce the data versioning principles? So no, okay. As I said earlier, Yan Kromp, he is principal developers to coming out of these data versioning principles, and unfortunately, he is not well today. So I will try hard to represent him and to deliver this introduction. So, the data versioning principles is published in Data Science Journal, the full paper. So if you are interested, you can follow the DOI and to read the full paper. But we developed the data versioning principle use the concept from software versioning. In software development environment, they established these, semantic versioning of software, release and revision and etc. And we also use the functional requirement for bibliographic record, that's also known as FRBR model, as a conceptual framework to guide the development of principles. And of course, we also, the user case is also a big contribution for this principles development. So based on the framework and the use cases, we developed 6 foundational principles, and we also introduce the concept of the 4 paths of the data. Is, we not versioning, from one data file to next revision. So, but to talk the 4 paths from the concept of data collection to the end of data product. We will talk about it more in next slides. So this is busy diagram that describe the 4 paths of data for a particular satellite mission, that is Aster mission. And we map these data processing and versioning process onto this Forbes model. So at a very concept level, so from left to right, we from abstract concepts of this mission to deliver individual data file item. So let me start from the left. The work is abstract concept of doing something creative. So in this context, the work is estimation. The estimation is then expressed in the data product. We call it the expression. So starting from level 2 through several cycles of processing, eventually in the expression, we have 17 maps as a data product. And further, these maps are manifested in 3 different formats: BSQ, GeoTIFF, and NetSafe. So manifestation is the realization of the expression. And when we get down to the right column, and so we deliver these data in files, maybe in different, that's distributed through the different data publishers. So probably there are hundreds of thousands of data files available. So people usually download, this data files that is item. So why we use this framework? So this framework could help us to understand, from the transition from work to expression, transition between the stages, what kind of intellectual input put into the transition, what are the major changes, minor changes made at each step, and who made that changes. That will help us not only to understand the versioning process, but also who contributed and who should be attributed and credited for what kind of change. Okay, here is the 6 data versioning principles. So first is versioning control. We call it revision. That is, we identify any changes made to the data product. The RDA dynamic data versioning recommendations, they provide detailed recommendation how to track these changes. but then these changes are only in data file like a bit stream. So then, but we need a version control to track all these changes in the first place. And then the next principle is data production and release. And so from keep track of changes to data release, and there is editorial process in the production that we call release. And when we release a data product, and it's important to communicate the significance of change from one release to another. And one way of doing that is through thematic versioning, but that's only a small part of that. We need a track all those, communicate all those provenance information. Then, since data are bundled in different ways, that's important to talk about collection and objects. That's questions of granularity and how to identify collection of object, time series, and aggregates. We aggregate in different ways. And the next one is format and manifestation. I think that probably was overlooked before, but when we analyze user cases, we realize the question of data format. We call it manifestation, and that is the identify different format of the same work. So probably each data centers one data centers took one format from another and change it into different formats to suit their own user group. So how do we keep track of those changes and manifestation? And also the derived product, that's a question of provenance. We realize that's important, but we didn't put much into that. There was a provenance working group before in RDA. They working on that provenance in particular. But here we just recognize that versioning could help tracking of provenance and information you need to know about objects and how one data object was derived from precursor object that's derived is well, there was a question, is that the derived one as a revision or as a new product? That's questions for the discuss. So among so why we come up these data principles, among all those needs, we thought probably these three ones are more critical ones. First is about the to support the reproducibility, because we need to define what we want to identify to reproduce a work. And if we can't, we fail to reproduce our research result, that will fail the accountability of research. Just a second, I just saw yes on the call now. Yan, please feel free to chip in if you want to add anything. then there is a need for authority, identity, and ethics. Where ambiguous identification of dataset is important. We can version what we present in an authoritative form, and also about ethics of sharing data. For example, when data is mirrored from one to another, who did the work, who gets credit, and who is responsible for making all changes to data and decimated items. So so we discussed of this in a plenary before, but we could continue this kind of discussion. There's also need for data quality. Different levels of processing involve different dimensions of quality. If we know what we are talking about, we can add measures to items and improve the data quality for each release version. And there are other needs. If you could think of, identify any other needs, you could put them in chat or in the session notes. The session notes, the URL is here and also available in chat. So next step, so from principles, we would like to develop actionable recommendations. So even you have a principle, people still wonder how do we implement the principles. And if we implement differently, so so we probably waste effort, people still doing what they are doing. So we would like to come up to these actionable recommendations that can follow the actual practice. And since we delivered the principles, they have also changes about data versioning somewhere else. For example, since then, data catalog vocabulary, they released version 3. In their new version, they added a relationship between versions. They added these vocabularies to describe the relationship between version, and I think that's it's a good move. At least you have a vocabulary for people to trace back, to describe the relation, and for users to trace back the origin of each version. But still, so the actionable recommendation probably need a broad scope more than that. Okay, that's conclude the introduction of the data principles. Are there any questions? Yes, feel to chip in if you want to add more information.
Not right now. Let's first hear questions.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't see you online before. When I share, I couldn't see people. Pan, Japan, and Pan. Yeah, you
Hi,
could
everybody.
just
Thanks. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Min, for the introduction. It was very informational. My I was wondering when you were going through slides and especially mentioned the W3C updated standards, I was thinking W3C has a standards for provenance. And I wonder whether you and James have looked at it, whether they mention or have any information on versioning.
Yeah, so you mean W3C Provo ontology?
That's correct. That's
Yeah,
correct.
so that's very high level. The Provo is very high level abstract, and I think you know the Provo describe you could use to describe data set activity and agent, that's people or organization, but not much vocabulary to describe the detailed the detail to version. So if I remember correctly, there are only 12 very up level vocabulary or terms in Provo. So for example, the let me go back. For example, those is version of or has a version of current version, that previous version that's not covered by Provo.
Okay.
What the I think I might be wrong, but at the Provo level, there was a vocabulary like this data set is related to that data set or associated with. So that
Okay.
a very high level.
Okay. Thanks.
I think that's why W3C DCAT went ahead to coming out, you know, this vocabulary for relationship between versions.
It does make sense. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm glad they
thank you.
did.
Thank you, Pan.
Also, we wanted to work on a separate aspect because we still talk about everything being versions, but what we were trying to do with the versioning principles is to give us a more differentiated vocabulary to describe what we mean when we talk about a version. That is, are we talking about the change in the bit stream? Then we suggest we call it a revision. Are we talking about two things that differ in bit stream, but there's something that is significant to the users? That we call a revision. Or it's different in bit stream, but it's the same content. It's just different manifestations. This is what we also try to achieve with these principles. And we took this, we followed the example of the Open Archival Information Systems reference model, where they created a new terminology to describe archival processes that aren't already steeped in meaning in what archivists had been doing until then. So for the data versioning interest group, working group, and now interest group again, one aspect is also to develop a terminology that allows us to speak more precisely about all the different things that happen in versioning, and not call everything just a version.
Yeah, I really like that aspect of the paper. I really appreciated the work the working group has been doing.
The thing though is, and this is where we want to make some progress today, hopefully, is to make this more actionable. So I think we have a good idea about the principles, and we continue to communicate them in various fora. But what does it mean in the work of a repository or an information aggregator or other roles? What does it mean for them to have those principles? How can we transform this into actionable recommendations, in particular for the repositories, so they can describe their processes with respect to versioning? I'll hand back to you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Yan. For the clarification, yes, as Yan said, when for co-chairs of us sit down, say, look at these actionable recommendations, we wondered what this would be like. You know, we can come out our own, but probably that's not related to people. So we really want to get a feedback, you know, what kind of recommendations you are after, you know, regardless of your roles as, you know, working at a data center or as a data library. So we would like to hear from you. So Yan, do you want me going on from here?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay. So the next one, I will give a brief overview of the data versioning use cases we collected. So as I said earlier, the principles also based on a collection of these 39 use cases that contributed by RDA members or non-RDA members. And we published these 39 use cases. You can follow the URL and to have a look of 39 use cases. Since we published the data principle, there are lots of views and a download of principles, but not many people look at these use cases. But we think these actually are useful collections for people, you know, to find the practice use cases similar to theirs, so they can compare notes. You know, if they are following same practice for the same type of data. So those use cases are from 33 organizations around the world, cover different research domains. There are use cases about social and economic science, earth science, and molecular bioscience, and also cover different data types. They show the current practice by data providers. But as I said earlier, we collected this use case about 2 years ago. Probably it's a little bit outdated for some. So please, if you provide the use case before, please check to get them updated. These use cases descriptions, when we look at that, and it helps us to identify differences in current data versioning practice, and also highlighting some issues that we discussed in the data versioning principle. I will touch a few later on. So here is a snapshot of the 39 use cases we collected from a few sources. We there are like 10 use cases we find from web and add them in the document. And there are 14 from Research Data Australia, from Research Data Alliance source. And also there are some data repositories, data centers, they contributed these use cases. And here are a few issues we identified from analyzing these use cases. First, so there is inconsistency of what constituted a new release of dataset and how should be identified. So the acronyms, those organization acronyms under is they contribute to these use cases. You can imagine when data type is different, you know, and then need to next what the significance of change from one version to next. That's almost that issue across almost to all use cases. Minor change in one use cases is regarded as significant changes in another. And the issues about, you know, in some use cases, the change in metadata lead to the version of dataset, but in some other use cases, they are not. And also what needed to be included in a revision history, every bit stream change or only those significant changes, that's also inconsistent across all use cases. And issues about how a version should be named or numbered, and some just give you know version 1.00, and some probably more rigorous follow as semantic semantic versioning and numbers. And also what version information should be included in data citation. So data cite have these 5 or 6 element required citation elements. I'm not sure if versioning is recommended or required, but there is a requirement from there is a recommendation from DataCite to add version information in the citation. Okay, that's about the use cases. Just pause a second. Do you have any data versioning use cases from your organization or your data center? And if you do have, please check out the use case document. It's linked from the slides. Please add them. So we can expand these useful resources and share with all. Next, so earlier, sorry, I take back. Earlier, I said the we developed the data versioning principles with the conceptual framework of functional requirement for bibliographic records. We thought it when we develop actionable recommendations or for people to think about how to track and organize their data record for different versions, we thought it would be useful to use this framework or this model to describe a use case. So, so this model is has been widely used by library community, and since it was developed in 1998, it's gradually improved the library record, bibliographic record management and curation. At the top level of this model, there are four concepts. The work is at a very abstract level of intellectual activity. Then that intellectual activity, for example, if you want to write a book, then you have that idea, then you have to realize that idea into expression. That's the content of that book. But that's still content in your head that need to embody that into manifestation. So you need to print that into as a in paper or record it in audio or an other format. Then you need exemplified by items. That's you know, the actual book. People can go to library or bookstore to get a copy of. So we thought this, as I said earlier, would be helpful to a way to trace the full path of data from then also enables application of PIT in systematic way to trace origin of each version, then determine what is whether a version is a replicate or derivative or descriptive version. You know, that will help us to identify, you know, is a revision or versioning has substantial intellectual input as a new work, a new expression, and then we could identify and attribute to people and the organization they involved in in this whole path of data data versioning and yeah, and a production. So we put this. So Jens, you want to add anything?
Just as an example to illustrate what this what you just talked about on the level of a work, when we talk about derivatives and other things that flow on from the original work, that is can be a bit of a grayscale.
Yeah.
It's not always easy to tell when something is just slight variation or whether it's a completely new, and once at what stage it becomes a new work. To take an example from literature, here we're talking about something on the level of the original work of, say, a novel and the translation of a novel. So the translation of a novel shares a lot with the original work, but it's an intellectual product in its own right. So
yes,
it's not always easy to describe those relationships.
Yes.
So in the full, we see some additional work coming up here to describe what happens in the full path of data when we produce derivative products, like in satellite remote sensing, for instance. There are concepts of data processing levels, and those are well established for that field. But what does it mean for other fields when you when you derive a data product from an existing one.
Yes, thank you, Jens, for clarification. We create a template for people to describe their use cases. So at the top, as the top is for concept of verbal model. Is group 1 entities from that model: work, expression, manifestation, and item. The bottom actually is group 2 entities from that model. It's identify who is responsible for each work. And there are also group 3 entities is about look at this work from a user's side, how, I help people identify, say, expression and manifestation and item and so on. But we just use the group 1 for the moment. We create a few examples that we may not get it right yet, as Ian said, some boundary, between work and expression, and between expression and manifestation is that bit blur. But that's why we went through these exercises to coming up with some kind of agreement, what counted as a new expression or manifestation, etc. We have 3 examples. Yan, do you want me to go through, or I'm not sure. Yan is not where, and thank you. You can hear from his voice, and also early morning for Yan.
Let's share the examples. I can go through the drone data example because that's the one I sketched out, and I can do the geophysics one if you want to do this one, the online survey.
Okay, so I do the online survey, then you can do the next 2 for that's more about in the geoscience field.
Yeah.
So this online survey, so if say coming out, say as social science researchers want to do an online survey on targeted demographic group for some behaviors or attribute toward the event. So that's why these researchers embarked to, have this idea about this research scope and the online survey to collect data. So we called it work. That's very conceptual. Then these researchers went on to design the survey and use that survey to collect data. So that survey instrument would be an expression of the survey. And then the survey may be expressed in spreadsheet, in whale format text file, or other online format. So each of these would be a manifestation of that survey. Then each of us will download a copy, download a copy of that survey. So maybe University A, Institution A distributes that survey, or B distributes that survey. So each of these would be exemplar of that survey. But then again, there are some groups of that, so they may for the same survey, so after say 5 survey results get back, the researcher went to change the measures or downscaling samplings and also add more data. So they probably put substantial work to change that survey. So they're questioning that is that a new expression. And also there are other correction made to the survey, like a fixed typo or subset, that's minor changes. Is that the same expression as before? And also down the track, the survey could be even the same original expression, it could be published by new publishers or repackaging that in different format. Is that counted as a new manifestation? So that's the way I describe the online survey. So next, Yan, we are talking about June data.
Yeah, this is, I think, a pretty straightforward case. Here, the work is the idea that somebody wants to create a model of a fraction network in rocks to as a model of the permeability of a reservoir in the rock. So how much groundwater, how much gas could flow through this rock, judging by the fracture pattern. This is the idea that this person or group has. And so this idea for an experiment is then expressed in taking pictures of the fraction network and deriving that network from aerial photographs. And if I just subset the area, just take a smaller chunk out of that aerial photograph, it's still an expression of that work that I wanted to analyze the permeability of this reservoir. If I reprocess the data with a different algorithm, then we might count this as a new expression, because in the original expression, I use a specific algorithm to do that. If I use a different algorithm to do that, we might count this as a new expression. When we move to the manifestation in a file, the physical embodiment of that work, we might be looking here at a shapefile for the geographic geometry. We might be looking at GeoTIFF, so a geolocated image file. We might look at the portable network graphic of its thumbnail image, or the JSON expression of the fraction network instead of shapefile. So they all describe the same thing in a way, but they are expressed in different formats. And then each of those could be sitting in a particular repository. So it's a bit of a synthetic example, but not too far from a reality in a project called the Australian Scalable Drone Cloud, where we could think that the Australian Scalable Drone Cloud repository offers the shapefile, the GeoTIFF, and the portable network graphic. CSIRO offers the shapefile and the GeoTIFF, and OSCOPE offers the shapefile and the JSON file. So the GeoTIFF at ASDC and at CSIRO might be the same content, but since they are in different places, they're separate items. Okay, let's go through the third example. here, this is a geophysics example, so you can. This was sketched out by Leslie Wyborn, and in this example, we are looking. The work is so-called passive seismic survey of the Hammersley Basin. So using sound waves to map the geological structures of an area in north central Western Australia. So the work, the intellectual creation is the idea to have this survey of this structure, and it's expressed in different ways. Yeah, using two different algorithms and shown as the so-called time series. So it's still the passive seismic survey of the Hammersley Basin, but it's expressed in three different ways. Geophysics has certain standard formats called mini-seed, HDF, and net-CDF. So each of these three different expressions of the survey can be served in three different file formats. And then any of these three different file formats of the three expressions are then offered for download through the AusPass portal, through Geoscience Australia, and through IRIS, the international repository for geophysical data. So I think this is quite a nice example to illustrate how you get from the idea of conducting a seismic survey to offering the files as items for download from different repositories, and why the survey can be expressed in different ways depending on which algorithm or perspective you use, and then manifested in different file formats. All right.
Yeah. Let me. So, yeah, we don't have much time left. Initially we thought if we have more people join, we can do some exercises to follow these use cases, to describe your own use cases in a FOBO framework, and also gather requirement for actionable guidelines. But anyway, if we have only 2 people now online, if you have any feedback, please, yeah.
Or if you have any
Please.
questions.
Yeah, are there any questions or feedback? I can stop sharing so we can see each other. Pen?
I have a question. So for the framework, when we talk about versioning, does it associate with everything that described by that particular model?
What do you mean everything?
Okay, so in that framework, there are work, impression, manifestation, and item.
Yeah.
So when we talk about versioning, and are we talking about just versioning for the item, or actually talk about the one I will see.
I understand what you mean. Not just about
the
version, yeah, not just about versioning at item level, but you know, at work level. So is that you release a product, someone derived a new product that would probably, correct me, then that probably become new work. And
Yeah,
how
that's where we get into that gray area of where it's then
or
difficult
new
to say what
expression.
is this.
Yes.
So
Because
if the
I think
derived
Yang was Yang was talking about the different manifestations could mean a different versioning, right? So if let's see, I go to the online and for example ASDC and I see the geotip file and there's a version associated with the particular data file that I have downloaded. So what does that version mean if you have fully implemented the framework based on the the data versioning principles?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Let's take the geotiff example and say we have geotiff at ASDC and a geotiff at CSIRO. And one situation could be that the content of those two geotiffs is exactly the same. They actually might have the same. No, let's take this example that they actually have the same checksum. So
okay,
if you put them side by side, you wouldn't be able to distinguish them. But they came from two different repositories. So in our model now allows us to say, even though their bitstream is the same, they are separate items. And if I want to give credit to the repository, I can do that because I can say this item was downloaded from A. But on the expression level, so on the manifestation level, they're also identical because they're both geotiffs. And then I say, yeah, and on the expression level, they are identical because they're the same thing. But then in the way we described versioning so far, we didn't have the vocabulary to pinpoint that difference, that the difference is on the item level. They came from two different repositories.
And that's actually very important, right? Because the especially with the data migrating to the cloud and data provided by data cloud providers, and then the questions always come up, which is it's authentic copy.
Yeah.
When you download it.
Exactly.
So this way you actually would provide that information to say, where it's from, even if assumingly it's the same data file, because it's originated from same data source, but somehow if some way has been changed and that they may not be the same data anymore, right?
Yeah. But just another aspect also with having this distinction is that we can at this level give credit to the two repositories, but we can also on the expression level give credit, and the expression and the work level give credit to the originator of that work and the expression of that work. So somebody who ran that algorithm.
Right.
And so if on that level, the producer says, okay, now I want to change the algorithm and run this process again. And now we get things with the change in bitstream. And
that's correct.
And so we can already say, okay, change in bitstream means revision because they're different. That there's no doubt about that. But then, is this a significant change?
That's true. Could be just
that
minor
depends on the
revision.
designated user community.
Uh-huh.
And this is where the revision concept comes in, where I can have an editorial policy that says, yeah, I do these, but only at a certain level of significance. That is an editorial decision. I say this is a new release, and I let the users know that this is of significance, of a particular level of significance to them.
Well, I think now normally it's decided by the data producers or data providers, whether it's a major revision or just a minor revision.
But the point, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
The important point for me here that in this editorial process, we don't have necessarily a quantitative measure to say how significant the change is. Because sometimes the single bit change can be significant, even though it's a really minor volume change.
Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes the different version, let's say if they change algorithm, not necessarily change the data field that much, even if the bits may be modified overall. And you're actually hoping the new version will not deviate too much from previous version. Otherwise, you really have to describe why that's the case, right? Is the previous one, there's an error associated with it, or just the default in their formulation?
Yeah.
So I'm not sure whether this is the right venue. I do understand you guys want to get to use case, but I want to ask this so perhaps we can discuss offline with me and Jens. I haven't really see how you implement it. It may make sense when I see the implementations, but based on what you have described, I wonder it's more of an attributes rather than versioning. For example, the whether the data files being downloaded from ASDC or from Ceres. If it's the same data file, it's just it's same. I'm kind of, I think I'm still sort of in this traditional the community. As far as data is concerned, it's the same version, but you have a different attribution indicated where it was from. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And then this is again where I think developing the terminology helps describe situations like this, like where we can say, because when we just call it version, and let's take again this example of having two identical items from two separate repositories. If we, I feel that if we just call this version, then we get ourselves into a bit of a tangle. But if we can say that we're talking about the same expression in the sense of a data product, but it's offered through two separate items that are identical in content, we can address different needs in this. That for the data user, it really doesn't matter. They can be assured that they're working with identical products. But as you said earlier, it allows us to identify the authoritative copy, the authoritative item. And it allows us to distinguish and address the repositories. So we can then say this item came from that place. So from the perspective of giving credit to the repository or giving credit to the originator, I think this makes a difference.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a very beneficial, and I will be, I'll be very curious to see the implementations. And I think the another way of asking question is whether that can be addressed by data citation rather than the data versioning. But I do wanted to stop so you guys can go ahead with session, and perhaps we, once I see some of the examples, if you and Ming can provide me with it, and I definitely can follow up, we can have offline discussions.
Yeah, we should do that. But just to answer or to reply to your last point, whether this is citation or versioning, I think they overlap. I think versioning vocabulary should be part of the citation. So when I cite, I can state what I am citing.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I can,
Plus,
if it is significant, I can say I refer to this item. I worked with this item, if that is important, or I can say I worked with this expression. If I'm more interested in the conceptual level.
yeah. And also, I think not all, data centers, revision all the time. They probably not necessary to publish each of those revisions. They probably publish release or, but then what changes make lead to that release that should be recorded.
Yeah.
And
I think it's a common practice now. It's a best practice to actually describe it. But then there's another the aspect that we can get into it for hours is some organizations would issue a new DOI for new version, new release.
okay.
Some would not, some will keep the same one. There are advantage for both practices. And that's another thing I think it might be tied into the versioning. How do you distinguish that, describe that relationship? And that's also tied closely with provenance, right? In
Yep.
some aspect.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. And Peng, just to interrupt you. Because we got a message. We need to finish 5 minutes early. So people can get to the next plenary session. So we are 5 to 11. So and Peng, thank you very much for the discussion. And we should keep in touch offline.
Sounds good.
Yeah, and thank you, Yan, for turning up even you are unaware.
Sorry for being late.
No, that's fine. But we should thank you to coming. So I think that's probably close our session, and thanks everyone here to participate. Hopefully we get your help for the actionable recommendations, make progress, and yeah, that is it.